I am absolutely thrilled I get to speak to people who are interacting with high performers all the time, right? And I know that high performers can be a blanket term for many things, but in particular, there seems to be an emphasis on entrepreneurship. And as I was doing my research, I thought to myself, what would be the most interesting way to kick the conversation off? And I find that not only something I personally struggle with, which might open it up pretty relevant pretty quickly, but I think many struggle with this. And there's this idea of like, you have this ambition, this dream, and either one of you can take this and you suddenly achieve it. And now potentially sometimes like a laziness sets in or a hesitation sets in. Like this idea of success and comfort and how it can kill sort of the action that's going on. I'm not sure if I'm phrasing this properly, but is there something that both of you understand to be true and a common pattern? Because I know I suffer from this. If I achieve something, suddenly like there's a relaxation or a fear that sort of sets in. And what do you make of that in your experience and in your work?
I mean, that's so interesting you say that because so for us, our high performers originally, we started in the world of finance. So a lot of those guys, it's quite the opposite. They'll get to one spot on the mountain and then they'll look around and there's a higher mountain somewhere and they'll always want to climb it. The acquisition of wealth is a game you can sort of play forever. And the longer you hang out in the world of finance, this is something you understand. There's always more money to be made. So that is kind of our home, the world of finance. And so those are the guys. And we're often trying to actually, not really trying to, but just reminding them that they don't have to necessarily always scale up at some breakneck pace. Sometimes they can slow down. But we love that drive and we always encourage it. The killer instinct, that breakneck speed, it's a lot of it makes our world go round. So maybe Lewis can respond to your particular inquiry.
Yeah.
It's not just kind of arriving at what one might define as success or, a certain comfort level. You know, as Denise said, we work with, finances is our home. We do have some other entrepreneurs as well. But in my experience as well, even in fields outside of finance, tech, for instance, there's always more to build. There's more to create. I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs, they have a very creative kind of heart in a way and a creative ethos. And so they might get to a spot and say, oh, okay, I've achieved this. What else can I create? What else can I build? What other product or service, can I bring to the market? And so it's not necessarily so much about where we're running into people that are, oh, I've achieved all my goals, where's the
Sort
meaning in life? I'm depressed, so on and so forth. It's, it's kind of in the people that are in the process of continuing to build, continuing to create, and the challenges that they might run into along that path.
That's really our specialty. A lack of motivation, of course, we see that as well, oftentimes in people's families. So we not only see the executives, but we see their families. And oftentimes, when you have ultra high performing parents or a parent, a child can sort of feel lost in that dynamic. And oftentimes, there are issues of motivation in a family, whether it be wife, child, etc. So in that respect, we would deal with a lack of motivation as well.
Yeah, this is really, I think, a fascinating thread to pull on because I remember early on when myself tried to like start a podcast production company and what have you, I saw a lot of articles talking about how depressing it might be for some entrepreneurs. They might be high performers, excelling. They have this feeling that they can't relate to their team. There's certain things they can't say to their team. And so there's this loneliness that is experienced at the pinnacle of that level of performance. Is this something you found to be true even today? As I'm talking 2014 when I read that. So has it changed at all?
It's a while ago. Um, for me, I would say, no, not terribly. Of course, there's more awareness, there's more equality. It seems like every year the world turns more equality. But I think that's still a very salient issue. And again, why people really appreciate, coaching and psychiatry in that arena. What about you, Lewis?
I'd have to echo what you said. You know, human emotions since 2014, the experience of loneliness hasn't changed. We're still wired the same way. And, if you build an infrastructure below you, um, sure, there's relationships at work and you can be cordial, but, having the types of relationships where there's like true, honest, reciprocal connection
Mhm.
in a large business that you've built that, there's going to be a hierarchy of sorts. If you've built it, you're the owner, you're the founder. Um, it doesn't always bode well for also playing the role as the manager. And
Right.
and so you kind of have to, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs or founders kind of sense that. And because of that, there is a certain degree of loneliness, whether the business is going through some sort of challenging time, they need to reflect calm and stability, where internally they're somewhat unnerved or freaked out or panicked in a way. That's not something that they want to convey to their employees.
Mhm.
Wow,
It's
to feel panic is almost a luxury as a
the
leader.
people that they would then level with. It's to your question.
Right. Yeah. Who can they turn to? That's usually why things like OSI and what you're doing, fundamentally fostering that community and that space for that, I think, is kind of the point of this conversation. So let's dive into a little bit more now. From what I understand, from what I've found online and resources as I was putting together this conversation, both of you walked away from prestige. We're talking, Mayo, Smithsonian, to build this movement. So what was the exact moment you realized this old system was costing civilization more than it was saving it?
So that's a great question. I don't know how much you've read, but I grew up in medicine. In that, my father, we're from a foreign country, and he had to go back to school. That's when he came here. So, from the time I was like, I don't know, 3 or 4 at Hopkins, I would be in the lab, the pathology lab, and he would babysit me, and he would put 2 chairs together, and that's how I would sleep, and then I would wake up and look in a microscope, and then, next day, you know what I mean, I'd be back there again. And same thing in the gross anatomy lab, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've been in hospitals rotating since I was an actual child. I was always the intern. I was a lifelong intern. My thing is, I had so many interests. I ended up pursuing law and politics and government and art, but that's always been there inside of me. I married Lewis, and I got to sort of see the transition in healthcare firsthand. And so that's when I just started looking, and just kind of experiencing some concern that just kept growing. Where do you want to jump in, Lewis? Because
Yeah, I mean,
you were in administration, you were chairman.
yeah, you see a transition, right? Where I think we're not only providers, but I think everybody's a patient as well, or a client. Um, and just trouble with accessing healthcare, feeling like a number, um, a dearth of providers, not knowing where to go. Um, the idea of like a long-term relationship or personalized service with your provider had really faded. And so
Exactly.
you
That's what
you
I
have
saw.
you have this kind of overarching backdrop where I think if you talk to many people in different, you know, parts of the country, even world, and say, you know, tell me where to find a good, primary care provider or good specialist or whatnot, people will kind of say, well, it's challenging. There's a challenge. And it has kind of led to kind of some kind of patches, I guess, if you will, like concierge medicine. But even
Mhm.
those have started to become very numerical in a way.
That's
And so
true.
we, it was kind of with that backdrop that was occurring in healthcare, along with the fact that in business, you know, the human mind is prevalent everywhere. Even in the hottest topic today, AI, the human mind is behind it. We've created it, right? And I think, our read of the kind of there's a gap within the business world and kind of the power of psychology, the power of, really leveraging that and kind of optimizing a workforce, from the top down psychologically. Sure, there's all hands on deck, you know, group meetings or whatnot, or everybody takes a psychological survey one day and they talk about it and they kind of
Right.
get some kind of cool insights, but then that's it. It's kind of left.
Or
Um,
not, like, just
yeah. And,
tedious.
and people are kind of just returned to their cubicles. Um, what we realized is, okay, that's an approach, but it's not really that effective. We saw things going is you have this healthcare trend where people are becoming more and more numerical, or there's a bean counter trend, and then you also have this power of psychology that you can leverage. Why not start with the top? Why not try to influence the influencers? Because guess what happens if you can reach someone at the highest level of an organization or sector, or a government position, they end up, and you improve their mental wellness in an ethical, sustainable way, there's a trickle down effect.
Right.
Suddenly, their spheres of influence are so large that all the people they touch, within their organization, within society, can benefit. And so that was really kind of the heart of what we were trying to do here with this.
They influence everything from market to policy. And so what I'm trying to say is I witnessed the corporatization and financialization of medicine as an industry firsthand, right? And so imagine, serving, OSI serving the head of a healthcare insurance company. To what Lewis said, you influence somebody at the top. I mean, look what happened with poor Luigi
Yeah.
Mangione, that whole incident. It's something to think about and a noble goal to pursue, I think, to just address all levels of influence.
I really like this idea that conventional wisdom always uses the axiom, you're only as strong as the weakest link. You're adding to that by saying, but you're also only as strong as your strongest link, if you think about it.
Exactly. Exactly.
And it's true. That's the second half of an idea that people don't ever get to.
Exactly.
And it's just like people who only focus on their weaknesses. If you don't leverage your strengths, it doesn't matter how well you know your weaknesses, right? So there's definitely a thread here that's being created, and I'm glad we're having that conversation because you're right. I mean, let's not. I mean, healthcare in America in general is a problem as a whole, and when it's the innovation sector of a lot of things globally, and you start taking into account the mental health of that leadership, it's a really big idea that should be observed and isn't a conversation that's had. We talk about CEOs who are tyrannical. As you were talking about
Right.
the yeah, you were talking about the surveys. I was at a marketing agency in New York at a time. I'm in LA now. And I remember taking a Myers-Briggs exam, the Gallup Strengths Finder, and we had like a 30-minute conversation about it. And then they did nothing organizationally around those discoveries or insights. I got more from reading Edward de Bono's like Six Thinking Hats and, organizing myself that way and me adjusting myself to try to incorporate that tone in the team more than the company itself did. And sometimes it just seems like it's sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, performative. And
Exactly.
and
For
is
the
this sort of what you're working with when it comes to working with people in finance and CEOs and entrepreneurs?
It's a good showing, and the fact that people are talking about it. I think from an
Right.
awareness standpoint, it is positive. It but again, it's something that, and you've seen this, and you see this in the corporate world, is trends happen, right? So everybody does an AI trend, and now every company's an AI company.
Mhm.
Everybody does a health and wellness trend. So all the big corporations are, health and wellness, so on and so forth. So these trends happen. And I think that, what's happened with kind of psychological wellness, there's a certain degree of almost like an introduction or a teaser like you had experienced, but then it was kind of left off. And then you were kind of scrambling on your own to try to figure out, what do I do? How do I work with this? And it's really, um, it's good that it's brought up because it got you, at least it made its mark on you that you thought about it. But not everybody does. Not every employee does, and goes on and kind of seeks out, further resources and whatnot.
It's really the one size fits all model. But then remember, we are addressing most often the people at the top. Now, when those people work with us, they may then ask us to come in and design a program, but it's never a one size fits all. It's what's your organization like? What do you want it to be like? What drives you? What do you want to drive the people, et cetera, et cetera. And it's always a program developed around your personality and the company personality or the desired personality.
As I think back to even how this conversation started, and when you pointed out, it's really the leadership that we're aiming to impact because of the trickle down effects. I'm curious. Let's say you come across somebody who just raised like hundreds of millions of dollars, and then they hear about you, and they've been having sleepless nights. What are some of the first things you address with them as they come to you? What do you take stock of as they approach you?
I don't think it's as Denise said, it's a one size fits all issue. We have that demographic come to us all the time. You know, some statistics here. Um, it's that kind of demographic that right in the fundraising stage, you're looking at about a 70% chance that someone's going to have some sort of mental pathology that arises. So odds are it's going to happen. Not everybody seeks out, formal treatment or whatnot, but it's going to occur. When people come to us, there isn't a kind of, A, B, C, D, E, F, stepwise approach, or it's kind of, let's get to understand the person. Let's get to understand their surroundings. Let's get to understand their business. What are their goals here?
It's always going to be a conversation a first few times to just figure out what's going on.
Yeah. We'll want to
Nope.
understand their fundraising model.
Yes.
What's the fee structure look like? How does that tie back to that individual's, psychology? And what does that say about them?
We have
So we kind of dive into a lot of their business and how it's a reflection of who they are as an individual and how they designed it and so on and so forth.
There's some really fascinating things going on here. I mean, there's this individual psychology idea, right? And this idea like that and I've always believed this to be true. The DNA of an entrepreneur is in the business that they launch, that they've been able to successfully fund and what have you. And it's impossible to remove it from that. Which, now brings us to the other part of the conversation is what happens during an exit. Because we're talking about the psychology of a successful funding, and that's one thing. And then the ones that do make it past that then have a successful exit. And that brings its own challenges and kind of alludes to what I was referring to in the beginning of our conversation as well, where it's like, okay, a milestone has been achieved. I've had interviews with entrepreneurs when I was back on Entrepreneur Magazine who would talk about how they made an exit and couldn't figure out why they were willing to do it again, why they jumped back in and started another business in healthcare, funny enough. And they're sitting there talking about, well, they hope they make this exit. Where does it end? What are your thoughts on how you approach it differently between when you're talking to someone who just successfully funded versus someone who successfully made an exit?
Some people might be older in their years and they're ready to retire and move on to some other hobby or activity or interest, or do some scholarly activity that they want to pursue. So a younger person who still is a creator of sorts, is already thinking, oh, what's next? A lot of people, and some people don't know. And so it's really about kind of getting an understanding and kind of working with these people along the way of, okay, what matters to them? What's a healthy ideal, a healthy next goal, and kind of working it from there. There again, it's not ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Someone's going to sell their company and then just have nothing lined up or nothing in their mind. I mean, these are very smart, high performing people that are used to thinking 10 steps ahead. And so they're going to have another they're going to have a flurry of potential options.
Not always. I think perhaps maybe you deal with a bit of a different demographic. But I think pointing to something Lewis said, it's very insightful. It is a life transition. And so, in life, we talk about birth and death, and you get divorced, you get married. These are life transitions that, as a society, we know about, we talk about. But maybe when an entrepreneur sells something they made, which is their baby, right? And they sell it, and they're left with this sort of feeling of kind of heaviness, perhaps grief, perhaps confusion, it is really something to understand it in terms of a life transition, similar to perhaps death.
One of the things I'm seeing as a recurring trend here in our conversation is it is really difficult to give solid advice in a ubiquitous fashion where it applies to all, and that's sort of the point you're trying to make here, and why high performers need such high touch interaction with someone who can help them develop a protocol, a mental wellness protocol that is adjusted to their reality. And it's one of those things where it sort of explains why they can't relate to their team, or why they can't have a very honest conversation, let's say with their board, if they're beholden
Mm,
to a board, because there are certain things you don't want to say to be
or
taken out of context in the wrong way, but we need to have those conversations. And when you have that psychological safety, let's talk about that. The kinds of things that are possible from that are entirely different. So why don't we dive into, because I think it's important. Let's say someone's listening right now, and maybe they're going to look into this further, of looking into your work and reaching out and contacting you. But let's just say they're still hesitant. And here's the scenario. They're at a WeWork and they're like, okay, I got to do something. And I don't know, because I know the trend has been in our conversation, it's hard to prescribe. But let's just take this scenario: 60-second daily micro practice that anyone, even in a WeWork, can sort of do to sort of move that needle on that superior human functioning, that high performer. Is there a practice that even yourselves sort of revert back to just make sure you get back to one?
Well, I would recommend meditation. And if you're just asking for sort of a one size fits all, particularly we often recommend transcendental meditation to the
TM.
people to our practice because it bypasses most of the challenges of meditation in that it doesn't require you to do anything. You don't have to clear your mind. You don't have to work to calm yourself or anything like that. It either works or it doesn't, and I've never really met anybody for whom it doesn't work. So, that's my sort of 60-second clip, I guess.
Okay.
What about you, Lewis?
I think meditation is very important. Um, TM is one we typically do refer people to. Mindfulness also can be quite helpful when done correctly with the correct protocol. When you think about meditation, you have to think about what neural networks are we trying to kind of activate. The different types of meditations techniques activate different neural networks, which you know each person, depending on what they might be challenged with, you're going to want to affect their neurocircuitry differently. And so there is some thought when we're thinking about kind of meditation, but a lot of the meditative techniques overall help broadly, and so I think that is one thing. Um, I don't think exercise ever hurt anyone unless they're going.
Right.
If
Always
they,
helps,
yeah,
actually.
yeah. I mean, there's kind of your nuts and bolts health stuff, right? Good sleep, exercise, whatnot. I mean, just general medical guidance for good self care. Eating healthy.
Lay out the
Right. Right. Have you eaten? Did you drink enough water? Have you slept? When was the last time you went for a jog?
These interventions have predated modern medicine, and they're still a mainstay. And the reason why is because they're meaningful.
Maybe you can offer some insight as to why certain people just seem to be able to sleep so little, live so savagely in terms of the way they care for themselves, and yet perform at a level that, I mean, I know there's exceptions to the rule, but some people are just truly exceptional. And I'm wondering, because you have the data through your experience, what do you find to be true of these kinds of people? Because I know you've come across them.
Oh yeah. I'll just say really quickly, it's again that drive that I'm telling you about. At the very highest levels, the people who in a way make the world turn. They are so incredibly driven, and it comes to a point where it's almost like fear of missing out, what could I be doing in the time I could otherwise be sleeping, and there's so much to get to and so many mountains to climb, and it's just a sort of internal drive. And of course your personal biochemistry, which we also optimize, that comes into play. But those people are people who, instead of saying, I wish I could get 8 hours or even 6 hours, are like, those are people who are like, how can I be really healthy and not really have to sleep so I can do all this stuff that I want to do, basically.
Right.
There's a certain, I guess, devotion that I think high performers in any field, whether it be business or sports or whatnot, that people have to have devotion. But along with that is there's sacrifice. There's only so many hours in the day. And so people can, have a choice of where they want to spend their time. And I think a lot of the high performers, they have such a singular focus on their product, their business. I mean, they're thinking about it, oftentimes 24/7, or working on it. When they're not working, they're thinking about it. And because of that, it kind of, it drives them in such a way. So things like sleep, things like, other activities in life, you know, are intended to, for good or for bad.
Wow, yeah, I mean, and that just goes to show the amazing design of humanity where that is possible. And some people need food, some people need a vision, and you might go without food, but as long as you have your vision, it can sustain you in a way that food probably never could. I know there's research coming out now that sort of having a goal direction in life helps you live longer, even. And so when I hear things like that, and I think about the work that you're doing, I imagine you come across, like you said, you're working with some of the smartest people in the world, people who hold large amounts of money. It's like, if I get a couple 100,000 in, psychologically, I'm already thinking, whoa, like I didn't know what this was before. And I'm talking, like heavy, we're talking 500,000 or more. I think I'd look at the world differently. So I can't imagine when you come into hundreds of millions and whatever the case may be. I know I've spoken with founders who had very little money left of what they've raised, and they have 2 weeks for payroll, and they just found out that their accountant has actually been doing everything completely wrong, and they may be liable for all kinds of things, and they don't have the money in the end. And so when you look at a psychological profile and a moment like that for a founder, even if they did everything right, they were with team members who kind of put them in a position that's not going to be ideal for them. And then they're supposed to continue to be high performers and kind to their team. And are these the sort of things that you'd like to address and help high performers with? Or if you had to say it in one sentence specifically, what are you trying to accomplish with these leaders and these high performers?
Trying to bring anybody that comes to our door a sense of peace, joy, and resilience. That would be anyone, and that would be the sentence.
Okay. It looks like it's unanimous. I want to be respectful of our time, and there's so many ways I want to take this conversation because you're both such fascinating individuals. So why don't we talk about one of the most apparent ones is I've interviewed enough entrepreneurs to know that they said the smartest business decision they ever made was the partner that they chose for
Mm,
life. Now,
mhm.
both of you are running this. And I found, and I don't know this to be true for you, but I found that most of them said they made sure that their relationship was a priority. And then when involving work, they made sure that they stayed out of each other's lanes. Is this sort of the strategy you bring to the table when working as a team in business and in life? Or what can you share that you found to be insightful and true of what's made what you've accomplished possible and what you're building possible?
When you say stay out of each other's lanes, is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I would just like to share. Recently, I was at Greenwich Economic Forum, and Brad Jacobs was being interviewed by somebody from Bloomberg, and she said, "Have you made any mistakes?" And he was like, "Of course." He's been an entrepreneur since he was 23. I think he's in his 70s now. Ultra billionaire, super super brilliant guy. And he's like, "Of course, I've made thousands of mistakes." She said, "Okay, well, is there any common thread in the mistakes you've made?" And he said, "Yes, absolutely. It always comes down to the people." And I thought that was tremendously insightful, and of course, I mean, the man lived it, right? The people you choose to work with, the people you choose to, lay your head next to, it means everything. In terms of us, I don't think, our lane is the same lane. We are best friends, and you know, we just like to do the same things. So, when I have an interest, so for instance, I became an appraiser, and then I started a business with Lewis, and he joined, and it turned out he was an incredible connoisseurship, and so we sort of bring out each other's talents. But I think, speaking for myself, we don't have separate lanes; we have the same exact lane, and I chose a partner for life, but also, as I was choosing a partner for life, I was choosing a partner for business because for me, my active mind, I can never stop. I'm one of those people who can never stop. So, it had to be like that. So no, we don't have separate lanes that I know of. Maybe something we'll talk about on the show.
No
Rain.
pressure, no pressure.
What do you think, Miss?
How am I supposed to disagree with this? Yeah,
Well, as you can see, I disagree.
well,
No, 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 no.
we dynamically are able to work very well together. And, sure, there's kind of, you take this, I got that, the operations of a business, so on and so forth. But, I think for a lot of the big decisions, we're sitting down, we're talking with each other, whether it be branding, marketing, you know, caseload, so on and so forth, corporate contracts, reviewing them, so on and so forth. Um, I think it's a luxury. I think it makes it work very well to be able to do that. Now, I've worked in other situations in past positions where with other teams that wasn't always feasible, and so I can kind of certainly understand the sentiment of people kind of staying in their own lane, so on and so forth. But we've been pretty good so far in not having any conflicts or any problems arise.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get the sense. I feel very close dynamic between you two. You're the kind of team that doesn't mind passing the ball to each other to get further along. It's something I've noticed and noted in our conversation alone, which I think is important. And it's kind of like what we talked about earlier. There are founders who will never have the opportunity to really discuss certain things, and you happen to have that experience and that space to be able to do so in a way where you both can understand each other. And I find that possibly to be the most invaluable thing a high performer can have is a confidant, right? If you will.
Yep.
No,
Right.
no higher calling. Yeah.
We got married. I've been married my entire adult life, actually. Lewis was in school, I was in school, and so when we continued education, we were sort of always in school, doing one thing or another, and then we always sort of supported any kind of career aspiration one had. So even when we lived apart, we were still together. So my adult identity has been as a married person. So it's really all I know, and it's just worked out beautifully.
Yeah. No, I think it's healthy. I think it's an important part of the human development, right? There are certain things that many founders don't get to because they sort of only focus on one aspect of their life, and then these things they feel they may be missing may have a lot to do with sort of just natural human experiences one should have. You've got your family unit, your friend unit, your community unit. Like all of these things are so important. I myself struggle more with the broader community aspect of life, and it's one thing I personally have tried to work on. So the work that I do as a podcaster really fills that spot in a way that I just don't have. For all the talents and skills I may have, I don't have that being able to put a group together. To put together a dinner for me is a tall task. If I want to put together a bonfire, I'm like, oh Lord, what do I? But when it comes to one-to-one or conversations, like it's a different part of me. And so I think those are all important elements, and I'm glad we're discussing these dynamics because it's these interpersonal dynamics that I think make or break a high performer when they start to feel that hole in their soul that they don't know where it's coming from. I feel fortunate to be able to foster a conversation like that, like the one we're having now. You mentioned AI earlier. I want to make sure we get into this in our conversation because it's relevant. There are many people right now, children who are talking to AI and then falling in love and then possibly going to a darker place because the AI isn't meeting them where they need to, right? There are people divulging their entire relationship for context in a context window and hoping that the AI helps them make the decisions. How do you feel about that as people who are working in the space where you're leading humans to feel more self-reliant and experience closer relationships to themselves and to the people that they're working with when you hear stories like that about AI and how that's being used outside of innovative tech and software?
Just to clarify, do you mean talking to AI and falling in love? Do you mean like them recommending people on a dating app, or do you mean an AI girlfriend or boyfriend?
No, I meant the second half where people are actually treating the AI like it's their relationship. I think it's great if you can get an algorithm to match people. Yeah.
Recommending me like an AI boyfriend. So I thought that was just clarifying. So you mean an actual AI boyfriend? A
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
that's
there are people and companies. I know Replica, one of the earliest companies that was doing this. The founder herself, it was Replica with a K. She had taken her late husband's like entire everything, photos, text messages, you name it. This was early, I think.
that was yeah, I remember.
Yeah, yeah, all to create this clone of their partner, right? So that they could just consistently do that. That's a case study. That's a use case for this technology. But when we're like, can you imagine a high performer doing that and putting all their business data in there, even if it's in a self-contained server? I mean, I removing the human element from relating is what I'm getting at here as a fundamental concept. How do the two of you, in your experience, view that act in a world like today, and where does it really help, and where is it actually hurting people?
Well, I think, if you follow the news, at least once a month, you'll hear a case about someone who committed suicide
Yeah,
because of some questionable advice or that's attributed to AI. Um, it's not, I think the big tech companies come out and say, well, you're not supposed to use it like this, even though the guardrails aren't quite there yet to stop people, from doing so. Um, I think as I said at the beginning of the conversation, we created AI. Humans did. Humans are exceptional. I think the human brain, what does it have? 2.5 petabytes of information. I mean, our thinking and our brain uses about 30% of our caloric intake, right? But pound for pound, it's much more efficient than a data center. I mean, we are, and so humans are incredibly exceptional. And so to be able to understand another human, on an emotional level, what they're saying, the nuance and whatnot, AI isn't there, And so when it comes to very kind of tender or heartfelt or communications that humans are communicating to, AI, the AI sometimes is going to, respond inappropriately. It's not going to read the emotional cues. Not that humans are perfect at it. you know,
right.
we, but
Yeah,
we have an ability. We have a skill set. We have tools. We have, eons of evolution to be able to understand each other and communicate on many different levels. And I just don't think it's not there. AI can't do it.
And I would just say it's a work in progress. I mean, taking the human element out, of course, there are many different types of humans. For instance, neurodivergent humans, they, don't relate to other people as everybody else does. And if you look at the changes in marriage, family, dating, family systems, that's changing a lot too. It's no longer boy meets girl in high school, they go to school dance, and then they get married when they turn 18. So there is a definite market, I think, for people who, can interact with AI and it can fill a certain role. But I think it's a work in progress. It's specifically uncharted territory. But what I would say is that, Lewis said, it's developed by humans. I don't think it's alien tech. Nor do I think it will evolve into alien tech. I know some people believe that it will, eventually take on a mind of its own. I think I just don't see it that way right now. I think there are safeguards that will be programmed, et cetera, et cetera. And so I don't think it's necessarily anything to fear. I think when you work with intelligent people, you sort of see that, people might sound a lot more like AI than, you might think. So I think it can definitely fill a need. And I think we just have to see where it goes.
I
But
love it.
I'm and I don't think anyone else should be necessary.
I'm grateful that you went there with me. There was no right or wrong answer to those questions. It just a conversation to have. You're right. There's this thing of like the logical solution is never always the right solution, right? There are times where if you were to do the logical thing, you'd end up alone. Like 99% of the time, actually, especially when working with humans. So I love the takes that you've shared, and I want to give the proper context that they are takes. Everyone's fascinated with this technology right now. We're watching what it's doing. If I can sort of elevate the conversation a bit philosophically, I've gathered from our conversation so far that both of you are very optimistic in your candor, at least from what I'm seeing here. And I think that's a great quality to have when working with high performers who may not be in the best place in their life mentally. That optimism comes very refreshingly. And so I'm curious, when you find yourselves in a position that maybe is not that optimistic, this is philosophical, of course, philosophically speaking, what do you do to get yourself to sort of to get back to that optimism that is so natural, for at least from what I'm getting from both of you?
So for me, it's just sort of built in. What I can tell you though is that when I sort of moved my primary residence to Florida, seasonal affective disorder is a very real thing. And that's basically the only thing that can affect me because honestly, I live in a perpetual state of happiness. And I think that brings value to this work that I do because I don't think there's a lot of people that really are here. And I'm glad I can share that with people and I found a vehicle to do so. But when I moved to Florida at primary residence, and was able to schedule my year around avoiding sort of the cold and dark outside of skiing, that really helped me. So I would say with, anyone who misses the sunlight or warmer weather, it's legitimate. It's not nonsense. You are feeling something that's a real scientifically valid phenomenon. What about you, Lewis?
Broadly, I think the concept is in order to kind of heal, you need to be uh, a healthy instrument, an instrument that can genuinely convey optimism, be a stable sounding board, so on and so forth. And this isn't something that we take lightly. I mean, I think personal growth, personal transformation, peace of mind, mental wellness is not only a service or that we provide, but it's a lifestyle, it's a life choice. And so I'm constantly like it's part of my life, whether it be prayer, meditation, you know, athletic pursuits, scholarly research, connecting with others, so on and so forth, healthy diet, all the things a lot of things I mentioned earlier, self exploration, self reflection. It's a day to day practice. And so, sure, does life hit sometimes and you get struck with a challenging situation? Of course, we all do. But having that groundwork in place helps you absorb it and you go right to it.
And
You
that's
already have an existing infrastructure.
what Lewis is describing. That is the phenomenon. You weather the storm with grace, and it happens automatically. Your brain is trained, life hits, your brain is trained then to go where Lewis just described. That's the phenomenon of superior human functioning.
I love it. Again, I'm so grateful that you're willing to go to these more meta places, um, because there's a degree of intimacy in discussions at that level that I think doesn't take place with the general, how do I track KPIs, this or that. At some point, you have to get to that level to instill and download a certain software internally on the soul that will get you to operate in the eye of the storm. And I'm grateful that you're willing to go there with me, because I know that many just want to know, hey, what KPI should founders really follow in order to understand that it's not that serious? And it's like, yeah, we could discuss that, but the truth is, they're very smart people. These high performers probably already know that. In fact, the problem is they know too much, right? So you got to unknow a little and sort of dive deeper into these meta ideas and these practices and keeping yourself sharp. And if there's one thing I'm taking away from our conversation, is that you two are high performers yourselves. And that's why you're able to help high performers get back to the performance level they're looking for. And for me, I mean, you go to the shoe professional to learn about shoes. You go to the jeweler for gems, right? You go to high performers for high performance. That's just the way it rolls. And so as we begin to roll things out here and close it up, I want to give you the red carpet. Is there anything we haven't discussed, or things that you like, a call to action you want to get to the listeners in relation to the work that you're doing with the OpenSea Institute, or individually together? Just this, the floor is yours.
The only thing I would say is PSA sort of is going back to what I said about how the weather for me was always something very real that could sort of bring me down, and I would talk about it, and people would, that's life, deal with it. You know what I mean? Take yourself seriously, because only by taking yourself and your own concerns seriously, don't worry about if you voice them to somebody and they don't take you seriously or they dismiss you. Start by voicing your concern to yourself. Take yourself seriously, because the OSI line is that there is always a solution to be found. So that's what I would say.
Okay.
I guess my last line would be: life is a journey. It's not about, oh, I'm sick, let me get well. It's about, let me grow and transform my entire life from birth to death, and, engage with that transformational process and devote myself to it. And it's people that kind of buy into that mindset of, I can continue to be better, to be more well, to exceed, to be more at peace, more content, so on and so forth. That I, in my opinion, tend to live the happiest, most fulfilling lives. So it's a devotion to that type of mission.
Yeah, I love it. You're right. There are people who go, it is what it is, and it ain't what it ain't. But it
Yeah.
ain't. It is what it is, right? There's potential, infinite potential, and I dig it. You're right. Until you take yourself serious enough to realize that you can improve, the fact of the matter is you won't. So start there. I'm super grateful for this conversation. Is there a specific website or place that you want people to connect with you after having heard this? And let's say they want to reach out. What's the best way to do that?
It's just OpenSea.institute. That's really the only website we have. Of course, you can find articles, podcasts, but OpenSea.institute, not .com. So yeah, go there.